And thank you, Melody Wilding. And if we haven't met yet, I am a professor of human behavior and executive coach, and I am the author of a book called Trust Yourself. Stop overthinking and channel your emotions for success at work. If you are joining live today, please say hello in the chat. I always love to shout you out. Let me know where you are watching from today. It's always wonderful to see people here from all over the world. And I am also the creator of a program called Resilient, which is a first of its kind, comprehensive program to help sensitive high achievers, people I call sensitive strivers, regain their confidence, master their emotions, and reach their full potential at work. So, again, if you're joining live, say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from today. And if you're catching this on replay, say replay, because I know we have a lot of people who come back and watch these sessions later. So, for almost 4 years now, I have been running Resilient, and I have seen it absolutely transform the lives of our alumni. People have received skip level promotions, they've gotten six-figure bonuses, they have even ran for and won public office, which is really amazing. But time and time again, what never ceases to amaze me is that their inner transformations are even more incredible and remarkable. And our alumni say that the people in their life, their spouses, their family members, their colleagues, even their bosses sometimes notice how much happier, lighter, more optimistic they've become. Now, I'm sharing all of this with you because early enrollment for Resilient opens in just a few weeks. So I want to make sure you know that you can join the free waitlist now. You can go ahead. There is a QR code here on the screen that you can take a photo of that will take you to the page, or you can head to melodywilding.com/resilient and join there. And you want to make sure you do that because time is running out. And if you are on the wait list, you will get first access to the limited spots in the program. Now, I have a few questions for you. I want you to type in the chat if any of this resonates with you. Do you find your mind drifting back to your to-do list? Maybe you're in the middle of family dinner, right? Or you're watching your favorite show, and all of a sudden, your mind is hijacked. And what should have been a peaceful moment now becomes filled with work-related stress. Have you ever been there before? Or do you catch yourself checking emails first thing in the morning, as soon as you roll over after you get up in the morning, even before you've had your first sip of coffee? Do you habitually cancel plans with your friends or your family because you need to catch up on work? Does a casual comment from your boss or a client dictate your mood for the rest of the day? Do you use work as a reason to skip workouts, hobbies, or other personal passions that bring you joy? And when you think about taking a vacation, does the idea of being away from work make you more anxious than the thought of not taking a break? So, if these questions are hitting maybe a little too close to home for you, you might be too emotionally invested in your work. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And being overly emotionally invested in your work is really common for sensitive strivers. If you've been here a while, you've heard me say this phrase, but these are professionals who are not only high achieving, so they aim high, they set big goals for themselves, but they also feel everything more deeply. So if that sounds familiar to you, you are in the right place. And now you might wonder, why do these people who are sensitive strivers, why do they end up feeling too emotionally invested in their work? And there are 6 reasons for this. So first off, sensitive strivers have a deep sense of empathy. They genuinely care about everything: the job that they do, their colleagues, their bosses, their customers. They even care about the office plants. Their hearts are just that big. And it's hard for them not to shoulder every single challenge or disappointment that comes up. Second reason is that they place such high standards on themselves. So, sensitive strivers are committed to doing an excellent job. They are terrified of letting anyone down. So, they can get so emotionally wound up in their work because they want to hit those super high standards every single time. The third reason why sensitive strivers tend to be more emotionally invested in their work is because of their level of emotional responsiveness. So, have you ever seen a chameleon adapt to its surroundings? A chameleon changes colors to fit in. Well, that can be a sensitive striver at work. They pick up on everyone's emotions, they are easily influenced by the environment that they're in. They can absorb the stress and tension that might be floating around the office. And that means they might take on extra stress during busy periods, or if a colleague or their boss is having a especially emotional time themselves. Okay. Fourth is that sensitive strivers are deep thinkers. They are always mulling over their work. It's like their brain never turns off. They are always wondering, how can I make this better? Or they may be overthinking. They might be replaying conversations in their head. And all of this deep reflection can be a huge positive, but at the same time, it could keep them emotionally tied to their work and make them have a hard time letting go. Okay, fifth is their natural drive. For many sensitive strivers, I would say most sensitive strivers, work isn't just a 9 to 5 sort of gig. It's a core part of their identity and who they are. So when they receive feedback or they face obstacles, it can hit really hard. And any perceived criticism or real criticism, any perceived failure is felt very personally. And that only intensifies their connection to their work. And number six, last but not least, is that sensitive strivers hate to disappoint, right? And that mere thought of letting someone down, of disapproval, of rejection can keep them up at night. So they often pour everything they have, all of their energy into their work to avoid any of this from happening. All right. Now, don't get me wrong. It is great. It is wonderful to have drive and to love your work. I want that for every single person. But sometimes this emotional over investment can tip the scales to become unhealthy and extreme. So I want to tell you about one of my clients, Luis, who dealt with this. Now, Luis was someone who uh, enjoyed his job. He had interesting assignments. He enjoyed working with his coworkers. His job paid well. The only problem is that he would get so emotionally invested in his work that it began to cloud his judgment and really affect his well being. So I remember once on a Friday afternoon, he told me a story about how his boss had called him to take a last minute meeting for a project that was behind. And even though many of the reasons the project was behind and was late were completely out of Luis's control, he felt like correcting it and rejiggering that timeline to get back on track. He felt like all of that landed solely and squarely on his shoulders. And Luis spent all weekend trying to get the initiative back on track to the point where he was sacrificing sleep, he wasn't eating well, and of course, he didn't get to spend time with his family, the only time he had with them all week. Now, many sensitive strivers can relate to Luis's situation because being emotionally invested in your work is like a double edged sword. Your drive and your passion propel you and motivate you to perform well. But and caring deeply about your work provides satisfaction. It gives you meaning in your work. But being too emotionally tied to your job is like dragging an anchor with you all the time. It can become a huge drain and a weight that you carry. And, yes, all of this may be part of your personality. Again, I gave those 6 reasons. As a sensitive striver, you may be more emotionally invested in your work. But there's also the environment that we live in now. Ever since 3 years ago, ever since 2020 and the pandemic, the age of remote work and blurred boundaries, there's less and less separation between the personal and the professional. So it's no wonder why our careers are such a defining aspect of our identity. We spend over 70% of our lives at work, and that has only increased since the pandemic. And while there's typically nothing wrong with devoting yourself to your team or your organization's mission and their success, big problems arise when your work controls you, when it dictates your feelings and your actions. So, I want to talk about how can you tell if you're too emotionally invested in your work. I want to give you some signs to look for so you can be on watch for this. And what can you do? What can you do to pull back and make your work more sustainable? Okay, so sign number one, you are too emotionally invested in your work. You take criticism personally. Let me repeat that one more time. Sign number one, you're too emotionally invested in your work. You take criticism personally. So maybe you have found yourself feeling angry, insecure, demoralized when you get bad feedback. It might be that comment from your boss that sticks with you for days, or you feel so preoccupied by other people's opinions that you avoid doing something altogether. I can't tell you how many clients I have. I was just talking to one right before this who was like, I'm not sure I should do this thing because I'm not sure what other people will think about me doing that. Right. Now, when you're too emotionally invested in your work, when someone criticizes your work, it can feel like a confirmation of your worst fears that you are not good enough. Now, before you jump to conclusions that you're actually not good enough, you're not cut out for your job, you're inadequate, I want you to separate criticism of your work as a product, as a deliverable, from criticism of you as a person. And I want to give you an exercise so that you can more objectively make sense of the feedback that's being shared with you. So, what you're going to do is you're going to grab a sheet of paper. And on that sheet of paper, you're going to create 4 different columns. All right. In the first column, I want you to write down exactly what the person said. Okay. Exactly what the person said, not your interpretation of it. Someone may have said that presentation could have been better. They didn't say that presentation sucked. Okay. So write down to the best of your ability exactly what was shared. In the next column, so in the second column, I want you to write down everything that is wrong with the feedback. Maybe there are inaccuracies, blind spots, maybe the person has the wrong information. All right. So that is your place to get down everything that feels wrong with the feedback and even things you feel indignant or bothered by. In the third column, you're going to switch gears and you're going to reflect on what could be potentially useful in the feedback. Okay. So you have first column, you're writing down exactly what was said. Second column, you're writing down everything that was wrong with the feedback. Third column, you're writing down what potentially could be useful. Was there a insight that could improve your process for next time, that would be helpful with your skills, a valuable lesson that you could learn? And then finally, in that last column, you're going to commit to next steps. So what action are you going to take? Maybe you need to schedule a follow-up conversation to clear the air with someone. Maybe you have to make a correction to a procedure. Or maybe you decide, actually, there's nothing useful in this feedback. And that's very helpful to know because it makes it much easier to say, actually, my next step is to work on letting go. And maybe you just take a walk around your neighborhood for 10 minutes to clear your head and get on with your day. Okay, so that is sign number one, that you're too emotionally invested in your work. You take criticism personally. Sign number two, you are too emotionally invested in your work. Work follows you home. All right, work follows you home. Being emotionally over invested in your work can lead to overcompensation. You overcompensate. You may work more because you think it will make you feel better about yourself. You try to prove your worth and provide more value by accomplishing more. But all of that goes against giving yourself a much needed break when you actually need it. And like I was mentioning earlier, you may have trouble turning off at the end of the day. It's like your brain does not have an off switch. You're always thinking about work, it's always following you home, right? Work bleeds into your personal time, even when you're off the clock. So you are not proving your dedication by being always on. What you're doing is undermining your performance and your success. So here I want you to change your mindset to view that decompression or that relaxation time as a prerequisite for your performance. So in order to perform well, you need that recovery time. It's not a reward, it's a prerequisite to doing your work well. And likewise, you need to put in place different habits to work on disconnecting from work, whether that's setting an alarm half an hour before you want to actually end for the day so that it prompts you to start wrapping up your work. Maybe you fully turn off your computer or you remove work apps from your phone so it's harder to log back in. Or maybe you actually put a bow on the end of the day. You wrap things up by writing down 3 things that went well and 3 things you want to focus on the next day. All right. So that is sign number 2 that you are too emotionally invested in your work. Work follows you home. Sign number 3, you are a people pleaser. Now, people pleasing means you have the tendency to put other people's needs ahead of your own. And think back to Luis's story, who I shared with you just a moment ago. He felt a huge sense of responsibility to be the hero, the person who was fixing everything, who was rescuing situations. Now, people pleasing can also manifest as absorbing the emotions of other people, changing your opinions because you want to keep the peace, or avoiding asking for help because asking for help may make you appear weak or that you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing. You may think that you are being generous and helpful by being agreeable and always being the first to volunteer, but that's not true if it comes at the expense of your own well being and the quality of your relationships and your work. Overextending yourself isn't healthy, it's not something to take pride in, and nor does it allow you to do work and to take initiative and exercise accountability. It doesn't allow other people to do that either. So, as with most things, self awareness is really key here. Self awareness is always the first step in creating a change, whether it's people pleasing or anything else. So, I want you to pay attention. When and where do you find yourself taking on more than your fair share of the workload or responsibility in a project, a relationship, a situation? And in particular, I want you to look for areas where you feel a sense of resentment, where you may feel overworked, overlooked, underappreciated, or just not recognized for your efforts. And this is key because resentment is a strong emotional signal that you are suppressing your needs. And it can guide you to specific situations that need your attention, that need to be addressed. Okay, let's go on to our 4th sign that you're too emotionally invested in work. Your identity is your job title. Now, I'm sure you've heard the advice before, don't take your work so personally or leave yourself at the door, right? Leave your work at work. You've heard some variation of these phrases before. But of course, all of this is much easier said than done, especially for those of us who pour our all, who pour our hearts and our souls into what we do. But if you don't have any self concept of who you are beyond what you do for a living, that's a very risky place to be. You may live in fear of losing your job because your entire sense of self worth would go along with it, right? Without my job, who am I? And in psychology, this is called low self complexity. Okay. That is when you link your identity to a single aspect, So when you link your identity to just being one thing, I just see myself as a product manager or an engineer or a marketing associate. You just see yourself as your job. And what research shows is that having that low self complexity is linked to higher emotional reactivity. So you may be more reactive to stress, you may snap at people, you may take things too personally, and it makes you less resilient. So it's harder for you to bounce back when setbacks do happen. Now, what do you do? So, how do you get beyond this low self complexity? Well, a little bit, one of my favorite tricks is a little bit of psychological distancing that can go a very, very long way. Now, that doesn't mean totally disengaging from your work, but it means you distinguish who you are from what you do. Okay. So I want you to ask yourself beyond being a leader, a manager, whatever your job title is, who am I to the people I care about? Who am I to the people I care about? Maybe you have things you enjoy doing outside of work. And it's important to have those things that build a sense of mastery and what's called self efficacy, a sense of proficiency and progress beyond just your job. And one of my clients went through a period of severe burnout, maybe about a year ago. And as a result, she took up flower arranging as a creative outlet. Another one of my clients began studying space physics, of all things, while another started volunteering at a local animal shelter. And all of those activities helped them develop a stronger sense of self. It helped them diversify their identities so that when work wasn't going according to plan, they had something else to invest themselves in and rely on. Now, let's go through those things one more time. I want to share with you again those 4 signs that you may be too emotionally invested in your job. And let me know in the comments which of them resonates with you the most. So, number 1, you take criticism personally. Number 2, work follows you home. Number 3, you are a people pleaser. And number 4, your identity is your job title. Now, I want to leave you with just a few other words of wisdom. And the first one is your job is something you do. It is not the totality of who you are. Your job is an important part of your life, but it's not everything in your life. It's something you do. It's one of many different roles you play in your life. And it is not the full representation of who you are. You are not just a leader, an engineer, a teacher, a consultant. You may be a friend, a pet parent, a human parent, a sibling, an artist, a hiker, a lover of good coffee. You may be a fan of quirky movies. The list goes on and on and on. And I want you to go ahead and share with me in the comments, who are you beyond your work? Who are you beyond your work? Now, I want to be clear that being emotionally or being less emotionally invested in your work doesn't mean you go to the other extreme and don't care at all. All right. What we're aiming for here is a healthy balance where we're both passionate and we're engaged, but not to the point where our job consumes our entire identity or dictates, has control over our emotional states. So when you do that, when you are able to be less emotionally invested in your work or appropriately emotionally invested in your work, great things happen. You make better decisions. You're able to step back emotionally so you can view situations more objectively and make better decisions. You can assess risks more clearly, consider various perspectives, make choices that serve the best interests of everyone involved rather than being guided by your own insecurities. You're also more agile, and setbacks at work become just that. They become just a temporary setback, not a personal failure. And all of that helps you recover more quickly, to bounce back from difficulties with greater ease because your self worth is not tied to every single work outcome. You also have better work life balance. When your emotions aren't wrapped up in your job, it becomes much easier to switch off at the end of the day. You can fully enjoy your time outside of work without that just constant undercurrent of stress and worry. And counterintuitively, you're more satisfied with your work because being less emotionally invested can lead to greater job satisfaction. When your identity does not solely hinge on your job, you're more likely to view your work as a meaningful part of your life, not the whole thing. And it makes us more able to enjoy the positives and navigate challenges without being so overwhelmed. So today we covered a lot, from why sensitive strivers tend to be more emotionally invested in their work, signs that you might be, things to look out for, and strategies to combat them. And we talked about the benefits, what you gain when you commit to writing the balance between your work and your identity. So I want to hear from you. Make sure you type in the chat, what were your biggest takeaways from today? Okay, make sure you write in the chat, what were your biggest takeaways from today? I love, love, love to hear them. I always come back and read them and comment to as many as I possibly can. So please make sure you type those in. Now, if you enjoyed this conversation today, then I do want to encourage you to check out my 3-month group coaching program, Resilient. As I mentioned at the top of this call, Resilient opens for enrollment in just a few weeks now. And I want you to imagine what it would feel like to give yourself permission to speak up in meetings without overthinking every single thing you say. To imagine not being sucked into draining cycles of overanalyzing and ruminating over things. And to imagine navigating tricky workplace situations, disagreements, conflicts with your team, your boss, without feeling guilty and resentful. And to imagine breaking free from saying yes when you really mean no and setting boundaries with more confidence. All of this and more is exactly what we help make possible for you inside of Resilient. And I know that may sound hard to believe because I'm sure you're watching this because you have enrolled in many other trainings, you've read lots of books, you've done lots of personal and professional development, but nothing has ever quite stuck or moved the needle in the way you wanted. Well, if all of this resonated with you today, then I want to tell you that Resilient is likely unlike anything you've tried before. And that's because it features a tailored approach for you as a sensitive striver, one that is grounded in my background in neuroscience, psychology, communication, leadership, and human behavior research. Inside of Resilient, we are hands on with you. You get weekly coaching from me and my team, so you have real time guidance and support to overcome the workplace obstacles you're facing. And what our alumni say is the most valuable part of the program is the community, is the support, connection, and brain trust you have from other seasoned, intellectual, thoughtful professionals so that you don't have to feel like you're alone anymore and you have no one to turn to about these things. So if you want to say goodbye to those feelings of inadequacy that are driving you to overwork, and if you want to feel more confident in your skin, then now is the best time to join the Resilient waitlist. As I mentioned, enrollment opens very soon. And if you're on the waitlist, it's completely free. It's just the way for us to know who is most interested and for us to reach out to you first because you've expressed interest. So you get first dibs at the limited spots in this program and first access to the early enrollment rate. So remember, the link for that is there is a QR code here on the screen. You can take a photo of that. You can also head to melodywilding.com/resilient. If you have any questions at all about the program or about what we talked about today, feel free to put them in the chat here or DM me. I'm always happy to chat. That's all for today, everyone. Take care of yourself and we'll talk soon.